The smell of smoke was the last thing I expected on the eve of my wedding. Weddings are supposed to carry the scent of flowers, perfume, maybe even nerves, but not burning fabric. I had hung my gown carefully in the guest room closet of my fiancé's family home, thinking it was the safest place, away from creases, dust, or curious hands. That gown was not just fabric. It was months of savings, countless fittings, and the dream I had held since childhood stitched into ivory lace. I was downstairs, rehearsing vows under my breath, when the first sharp scream rang out. My fiancé's younger sister burst through the hallway, her face pale and frantic, shrieking, "The dress! The dress!" The sound cut through me, pulling me upstairs before I could even think. My heart pounded against my ribs as the acrid smoke grew thicker with every step. When I flung the door open, the world slowed. Flames clawed up the hem of my gown, orange tongues devouring the lace that had once made me weep with joy in the boutique mirror. The air shimmered with heat, the fabric curling and blackening as if years of dreams were being erased in seconds. And in front of it all stood Vivienne, my future mother-in-law, lighter in hand, face calm, lips curved into a thin, satisfied smile. It wasn't shock on her face. It wasn't fear. It was triumph. My fiancé Elias rushed past me with a shout, grabbing a blanket from the bed to smother the flames. His sister threw water, neighbors scrambled in with towels and buckets, the scene descending into chaos. Yet I stood frozen at the threshold, my body rooted as I watched the most important symbol of my wedding reduced to smoldering scraps. Vivienne's eyes met mine across the smoke-filled room, steady and cold. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. Instead, she tilted her chin slightly, almost regal, and muttered in a voice sharp enough to slice through the noise. "Now maybe he'll marry someone worthy." The words hit harder than the fire itself. My chest tightened, not just with the sting of smoke but with the realization that this was no accident. This was sabotage, deliberate and cruel, carried out by the woman who should have been welcoming me into her family. Around us, the fire hissed and sputtered under Elias's desperate efforts. The gown was ruined beyond saving, a heap of charred lace and ashes. Guests who had come early for the wedding gathered in the doorway, whispering, shocked. And still Vivienne stood, lips pressed together, as if she had finally accomplished what years of disapproving looks and cutting remarks had failed to achieve. But she had miscalculated. She thought fire would break me, that humiliation would make me surrender the life I had built with her son. Instead, something colder took root in me. I straightened, my voice steady despite the smoke scraping my throat. I looked her dead in the eyes and said words so sharp, so final, that her expression faltered for the first time. What I said next made her pale instantly. Vivienne had never liked me. From the very beginning, she carried herself with the air of a queen who believed no one was good enough for her heir. The first time I joined the family for dinner, I made the mistake of thinking it would be a warm, welcoming evening. Instead, it became an examination under a microscope. She criticized the way I held my fork, raised her brows at my choice of career in event management, and asked pointed questions about my parents as though my background were a stain that could never be polished away. Every gesture told me she had already judged and dismissed me. To Vivienne, I was an interloper daring to step into her carefully constructed world. I wasn't refined enough, wealthy enough, or ambitious enough, at least by her standards. Her disapproval came cloaked in the language of concern. She would sigh and remark to Elias, "Are you sure she's the one?" Sometimes it was sharper, a warning disguised as humor. "A mother knows best, darling. Maybe think twice." And when subtlety failed, she pleaded outright, "You can still change your mind. Don't throw your future away on someone who doesn't understand our family." Those words were cutting, but I had brushed them aside. Families had conflicts, I told myself. She would come around in time. I thought her hostility was just the pain of letting go of her son. I was wrong. Because arson, that wasn't maternal fear. That wasn't protectiveness. That was something darker, rooted not in worry but in control. Setting fire to my gown was not a mistake, not a moment of lost temper. It was a message. Vivienne wanted me erased from Elias's life, and she wanted to watch me burn along with that dress. Elias's reaction that night was explosive. He shouted at her, his face red with disbelief and anger, demanding to know how she could sabotage the woman he loved. But Vivienne didn't flinch. She didn't even raise her voice. She simply folded her arms, lips pressed in a smug smile, and said with chilling certainty, "You'll thank me one day." She believed she had won. She thought fire had destroyed more than fabric, that it had destroyed my resolve. But Vivienne never understood me. I had grown up in a house where arguments were loud and victories were often silent. I learned early that silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. And strategy, not rage, would be the weapon I used against her. Elias's hands trembled as he spoke. "Please, love, postpone. We can get another dress, call the boutique, push the whole thing back a month. We'll fix this." His voice was raw with urgency and a kind of helplessness I hadn't seen in him before. He kept picturing guests arriving, caterers waiting, and a ruined photograph that would never capture what we'd planned. I looked at him and saw panic trying to override reason. I thought of the months of planning, the faces who'd traveled, the grandparents who had rearranged flights. Mostly, I thought of the moment when I'd walk down the aisle toward him. That moment mattered more than a single gown. "No," I said simply. "We're not postponing." It wasn't stubbornness. It was a choice. Vivienne's act had a pattern, humiliation dressed as intervention. If she could stop the wedding now, she'd have the satisfaction of watching me beg and beguile my way back into a place I didn't belong. She wanted proof that her cruelty could fracture me. I wouldn't offer her that victory. That night I worked systematically. First, I cataloged everything salvageable. Invoice numbers, boutique contacts, the serial tag on the hanger, the extraction of labels from the scorched lining, details that would look obsessive on paper but were essential. Then I called my cousin, Malik, a lawyer with a blunt way of cutting through theatrics. "If someone destroys property intended for a wedding," I asked, keeping my voice steady, "what does that count as?" He was quiet a beat, then precise. "Arson if intentional and there's proof of ignition. Destruction of personal property. Malicious interference with contractual or expected benefits. If there's intent to prevent a wedding, you might add malicious interference. Document everything. Photographs, witness statements, timestamps, anything that ties the act to the perpetrator." His list read like ammunition. I felt my panic slowly remodel into planning. Malik's language removed the fog of insult and replaced it with something actionable. By midnight I'd assembled a folder, burned fragments in a sealed bag, signed witness statements from neighbors who'd seen Vivienne in the hallway, and the initial receipts from the boutique. I even had a screenshot of Vivienne's shoes captured on the security footage walking toward the guest room 15 minutes before the scream. Small things, but in total they became a map. Elias wanted to storm her room and demand apologies. I stopped him. "Not now," I said. "Let her keep her pride. The law doesn't need theatrics, it needs evidence. Let her keep believing she's won until she understands she's actually walking into a trap built with her own arrogance." He looked at me, equal parts awe and fear, and for the first time since the gown burned, I felt in control. The first thing I did was preserve the ruin. I wrapped the charred remnants of the gown in plastic, flattened the scorched hanger, and labeled everything with the date and time. It felt clinical and almost surreal, turning something so intimate into an exhibit, but if you wanted the truth to hold up, it needed to be handled like evidence, not emotion. Next, I pulled the security footage. The house had cameras on the front porch and the service hall. The video timestamps were clear. There it was, Vivienne walking with a measured step, lighter in hand, pausing at the guest room door, then a flash of flame reflected on the closet rail. Her expression hadn't been panic, it had been smug. I exported the clips to multiple drives and emailed copies to Malik with a note. "Do not delete. Chain of custody." He replied, "Good. Keep copies off-site." I called the boutique while the house was still quiet. The owner, an older woman with a memory for gowns, answered and listened in stunned silence. When I told her what happened, she offered the original receipt, the tailoring notes, even an archived photo from the fitting session. "We'll support you," she said. "If anyone tries to say you damaged it yourself, we'll testify." Within an hour I had digital scans of the receipt, a copy of the order number, and the shop's official letterhead confirming purchase and pickup. Neighbors were the next piece. A woman across the street had been on her back porch and saw Vivienne moving quickly down the hallway that afternoon. A young man delivering newspapers had heard the shout. I knocked on doors and collected short written statements, time, what they saw, the direction Vivienne took. Each statement was signed, time-stamped with my phone's camera, and added to the folder. I also checked the house logs. Who had keys, who had been in the house that day, whether any appliances had malfunctioned, anything that could be presented as routine rather than convenient. The housekeeper's schedule showed she'd been at a client's lunch across town at the time, which removed any plausible deniability about accidental ignition. By dawn, the evidence stack had shape: a sealed bag with the burned fabric and hanger, 3 neighbor statements, video clips copied twice, boutique invoices, and an emailed offer of testimony from the shop owner. Malik called to say it was enough to open a formal complaint if we wanted. He advised patience, show the files to no one but him and keep Vivienne thinking she still held control. Elias hovered, restless and furious. "What are you planning?" he asked, voice raw. I met his eyes and felt the calm that came from having options. "I'm not going to scream and tear this house apart," I told him. "That would be a victory for her. I'm going to terrify your mother, with nothing but the truth." He swallowed, a complicated mix of relief and dread passing through him. The folder sat between us like a loaded promise, every page a lever waiting to be pulled. Sunlight pooled through the bay windows as if the day itself had forgotten the night before. Bouquets were arranged, the pianist rehearsed a soft prelude, and caterers adjusted table settings with military precision. Outside, cars arrived in neat lines, guests who'd come from cities away, unaware that the night had almost collapsed into catastrophe. Inside, the hum of normalcy felt fragile, like a glass kept too close to the edge of a table. Vivienne arrived as she always did for family events, late enough to command attention, early enough to catch every eye. Pearls, precise makeup, the kind of tailored dress that seemed designed to say she belonged at the center of everything. Her smile was steady, practiced, an armor that suggested nothing could touch her. Only a few people knew better. A hush moved through the room as she breezed in. There were murmurs, a few raised brows, a ripple of whispers about the accident. But Vivienne wore the whispers like jewelry, unaffected. I wore a borrowed gown. It was nothing like the one lost to smoke, simpler, less ornate, but when I first put it on in the preparation suite, the mirror reflected the same person who had stood before the boutique months earlier. There was that heartbeat of anticipation, the one that made everything else thin to a single line. Walk down that aisle and say yes. The ceremony schedule tightened, the processional cues, the last-minute seating, the ring hidden safely inside a velvet box. Bridesmaids moved with quiet efficiency, and Elias paced once, twice, then steadied himself. He touched my hand and mouthed, "You okay?" I nodded. My chest steadied. I'd rehearsed courage in the small hours. Grief could be dramatic. Courage could be quiet and absolute. Just before the procession, while guests shuffled in and the organist tested a final chord, I asked Vivienne to step into the side room under the pretense of a quick chat. Her smile sharpened as if she smelled victory. "Changed your mind about marrying my son?" she said, the sarcasm clipped and deliberate. I closed the door and set the folder on the small wooden table between us. The room smelled faintly of lilies and polish, banal domesticity undercutting the moment. Vivienne's hand hovered, then dropped as her gaze fell on the photographs, a still of her at the closet, the lighter glinting in the footage, close-ups of scorched lace, the boutique receipt, the neat, typed witness statements with signatures at the bottom. Her facade cracked, just a hairline, the way old porcelain develops a fine spiderweb under heat. Her color leached out. "What is this?" she hissed, the question more a reflex than curiosity. "This," I answered, voice low and even, "is the file that goes to the police, unless you do one thing." I watched her swallow, watched the tiny shifts that betray someone calculating survival. "You sit in that front row at 2 o'clock, you smile when our vows call for it, and you never again interfere in decisions between me and Elias. Ever." For a moment she opened her mouth, outrage and denial sparking like flint. "You wouldn't dare," she began. I let the silence stretch until the organist struck the opening note. I leaned forward, keeping my voice small enough that only she could hear. "Try me," I said. "One more stunt, and the only dress you'll be wearing is an orange jumpsuit." Her eyes flicked away. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked afraid. The sound of the organ swelled, the first guests rose from their seats, and Vivienne smoothed her skirt with hands that trembled just enough that I noticed. She nodded once, too quick, too sharp, and left the room with that practiced composure still pinned to her face. But the composure now felt brittle, like lacquer over a crack. For the first time since I had met her, Vivienne trembled. Her hands, usually folded with aristocratic poise, shook as though the confidence she wrapped around herself like armor had finally cracked. Her voice faltered, but her words were still laced with defiance. "Elias will never forgive you if you drag his mother into court. You'll ruin your marriage before it even begins." I kept my tone measured, each word deliberate. "No, Vivienne. He'll never forgive you if you sabotage this wedding again." Her lips parted to spit back another retort, but the sound of the door opening cut her off. Elias stepped inside, adjusting his cufflinks, unaware he was about to walk into the moment that would redefine his relationship with both women in his life. Vivienne's eyes darted to him, desperation flashing. She straightened her shoulders, her expression snapping back into its usual mask, ready to twist the narrative. But I was quicker. Without a word, I placed the folder into Elias's hands. "Read," I said softly. He flipped through the evidence page by page, the photographs of the flames, the charred lace, the grainy stills of his mother holding the lighter, the boutique's confirmation, the neighbor's statements. With every page, his expression shifted, confusion first, then disbelief, and finally a cold, quiet anger. When he looked up, his voice was almost a whisper, but it carried more weight than any shout. "Mom," he said, his jaw tight. "This is unforgivable." Vivienne's composure shattered. She lunged forward, reaching for the folder as though ripping it from his hands could erase the truth. But Elias stepped back, holding it out of reach. She froze in mid-motion, suddenly small, powerless in the presence of the son she had always believed she could control. I stood beside him, silent but resolute. For the first time, Vivienne had no weapon left, no cutting remark, no manipulative plea, no grand gesture to reclaim the spotlight. The ceremony went ahead exactly as planned. Guests saw flowers, vows, and smiles. They applauded when we kissed, admired the borrowed gown, and believed it was a flawless day. But I knew, and Vivienne knew, that she sat stiffly in her seat, every clap forced, her pearls suddenly feeling like shackles. To everyone else, it was a wedding. To Vivienne, it was a reckoning. Every minute of that ceremony reminded her that her cruelty had been turned against her, transformed into the very strength that carried me down the aisle. A week passed. The wedding photographs had been printed, laughter still echoed from guests who described the day as flawless, and Elias and I were settling into the rhythm of marriage. But Vivienne was not finished. For women like her, defeat was not something to be accepted easily, it was a wound that festered until they tried again. I found her waiting for me one afternoon, cornering me in the quiet of the garden. Her pearls were gone, her face bare of makeup, but her eyes still glittered with venom. She leaned close, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You've ruined this family," she spat. "Elias doesn't look at me the same anymore. My friends whisper. My own son treats me like a stranger." For a moment, I studied her, the woman who had spent years sharpening her words like knives, the same woman who had held a lighter over my future. And then, instead of rage, I felt only clarity. I smiled faintly, not in mockery but in steady defiance. "No, Vivienne. I haven't ruined this family. I've protected it. From you." She froze, her mouth opening as if to unleash another tirade. But before she could speak, I continued, calm and deliberate. "The evidence is still there. Untouched. Preserved. Every photograph, every statement, every frame of video. Do you know what that means? It means your reputation, your freedom, your carefully built facade. They hang by a thread. My lawyer's number sits in my phone. One call, Vivienne. Just one and it's all over. Her expression shifted. For the first time, she wasn't the towering matriarch, but a woman cornered, calculating, realizing that her power had limits. The arrogance drained from her face, replaced by something she had never shown me before, fear. I leaned in, lowering my voice so only she could hear. I don't want vengeance. I don't want your ruin. All I want is peace. But if you force me again, if you dare to sabotage what I've built with Elias, then the world will finally see you for who you are. And when that day comes, you won't be walking back to your comfortable home, you'll be walking into a cell. She blinked rapidly, her hands twisting together. No reply came. For once, Vivienne understood. The war was over, not because she surrendered, but because she finally realized I had already won. Months slipped by, and the rhythm of married life slowly took root. Elias and I found comfort in the small rituals: morning coffee together before work, shared dinners, late-night conversations about the future. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and it was safe from interference. Vivienne remained present on the edges of our lives, but distant. She attended family gatherings when necessary, seated politely, her pearls still in place, but her voice quieter, her comments measured. The fire that once blazed in her eyes, the fire that had tried to reduce me to ash, was gone. In its place lingered something colder, wariness. She watched me carefully now, not because she wanted to find weakness, but because she finally recognized the danger of underestimating me. There were no more whispered warnings to Elias, no more subtle digs at my family, no more attempts to corner me. She had learned that silence was no longer my submission, it was my strategy, and one she could not counter. In our home office, on the top shelf of the cabinet, sat a clear evidence bag. Inside were the charred remnants of my wedding gown, the scorched lace, the warped hanger, the ashes carefully preserved. Elias had once asked why I kept it, why I hadn't thrown it away after the wedding. Because it reminds me, I told him simply. And it did. Every time my eyes passed over that sealed bag, I remembered the exact moment Vivienne's grip on us broke. It wasn't when Elias saw the evidence. It wasn't when the ceremony carried on despite her sabotage. It was when I leaned close, steady and calm, and said the two words that stripped her of every illusion of power. Try me. Those words had not been screamed. They hadn't been spat in anger or flung in desperation. They were delivered with composure, with certainty. And that certainty was what Vivienne could never fight. It wasn't rage that protected my marriage. It wasn't threats or vengeance. It was the calm assurance of someone who had learned, long ago, that silence could be a shield and truth could be a sword. Vivienne had tried to destroy me with fire. In the end, it was her own flames that burned out, leaving her in the shadows, and me standing exactly where she never wanted me to be, by Elias's side, unbroken. And that's where this story closes, not with flames or fury, but with clarity. Vivienne thought she could break me by destroying a gown, by trying to shatter the symbol of everything Elias and I had built. But in the end, it wasn't fire that defined me. It was resolve. The truth is, people like Vivienne exist in more lives than we realize. They test boundaries, they push, they sabotage, all in the name of control. But sometimes, the most terrifying answer you can give isn't rage, and it isn't surrender. It's calm. It's certainty. It's the quiet refusal to be broken. For Vivienne, that lesson came in two simple words: try me. Words that turned her power into fear and her cruelty into silence. To everyone else, our wedding was picture perfect. But behind the smiles and the photographs, it carried a deeper truth, one I will never forget. No one decides my worth but me. If this story gripped you, don't forget to hit subscribe, tap the bell icon, and share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing your perspectives, and your support keeps these stories alive. Until next time, remember, strength often speaks softest.